The limp had defined Theresa Kincaid's entire life, and by the time she turned 22 in the sweltering summer of 1878, she had accepted what everyone in Columbus, New Mexico, told her. No man would ever want a crippled wife. She had been born with her left leg shorter than the right, twisted at an angle that made walking without her cane an impossibility. The wooden stick had become an extension of herself, clicking against the dusty boards of the general store where she worked 6 days a week. Mrs. Patterson, the store owner, had given her the job out of pity 3 years ago, and Theresa knew it. She also knew that pity was about all she could expect from the world. Columbus sat near the Mexican border, a small settlement that had grown around the railroad depot. The town consisted of a single main street lined with wooden buildings that baked under the relentless desert sun. Dust devils danced through the thoroughfare on windy days, and the heat made everything shimmer like a mirage. It was not a gentle place, and the people who lived there were hardened by the harsh landscape. Theresa stood behind the counter of Patterson's general store, carefully arranging cans of beans into a pyramid display. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her calico dress, though clean and mended, had seen better days. She did not spend money on frivolous things like new fabric or ribbons. What would be the point? The bell above the door chimed, and Martha Hensley walked in with her daughter, both dressed in their Sunday finest despite it being a Thursday. Martha's eyes swept over Theresa with the briefest flicker of disdain before she plastered on a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Theresa, dear, I need 3 yards of that blue gingham," Martha said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Theresa nodded and moved toward the fabric section, her gait uneven, her cane thumping against the floor with each step. She felt their eyes on her back, heard the whispered comment that Martha made to her daughter, something about such a shame, and never find a husband. She had heard it all before. The pitying looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the well-meaning church ladies who told her that God had special plans for those who suffered. Theresa did not want special plans. She wanted what every other woman wanted, a home of her own, a husband who looked at her with love instead of pity, children to raise and cherish. But those were foolish dreams, and Theresa Kincaid had learned not to indulge in foolishness. She measured out the fabric with practiced precision, cut it cleanly, and wrapped it in brown paper. Martha paid and left without another word, the bell chiming her departure. Theresa returned to her work, alone in the quiet store, Mrs. Patterson having stepped out to visit the milliner next door. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. Theresa was inventorying the stock of coffee when the bell chimed again. She looked up and felt her breath catch. The man who entered was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled his dusty coat. He wore a battered Stetson hat that shadowed his face, and his boots were caked with the red dirt of the trail. A gun belt sat low on his hips, the holster tied down in the manner of someone who knew how to use it. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Pale blue, like water over stone, set in a face weathered by sun and wind. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that needed cutting, and nodded to her politely. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and rough like gravel, "I am looking for work supplies. Rope, dried goods, maybe some ammunition if you stock it." Theresa found her voice, though it came out softer than she intended. "We have all of that, sir. What kind of work are you doing?" "Ranch hand work, if I can find it," he said, moving further into the store. "Just rode in from Arizona Territory. Heard there might be work around here." She watched him browse the shelves, noting the way he carried himself with easy confidence. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, and there was something about him that seemed different from the other cowboys who drifted through Columbus. He did not swagger or speak too loudly. He moved with purpose but without hurry. The Patterson Ranch might be hiring, Theresa offered, surprising herself by speaking up. It is about 5 miles northwest of town. They run cattle and usually need extra hands. The cowboy turned to look at her, really look at her, and Theresa felt heat rise to her cheeks. His gaze was direct but not intrusive, respectful in a way that seemed genuine rather than forced. "Much obliged for the information, madam," he said. "Name is Jacob Brennan." "Theresa Kincaid," she replied, then added, "though everyone calls me Tess. Pleased to meet you, Miss Kincaid." He did not call her Tess, did not presume the familiarity. She appreciated that. Jacob spent the next 20 minutes selecting supplies: a coil of rope, several tins of beans and peaches, coffee, hardtack, and a box of ammunition for his rifle. He piled everything on the counter, and Theresa tallied the cost, her fingers quick on the abacus. "That will be $4.30, she said. He paid without haggling, counting out the money carefully from a worn leather pouch. As she wrapped his purchases, she felt him watching her, but when she glanced up, he was looking at the jars of penny candy near the register. "Those lemon drops any good?" he asked. "They are my favorite," she admitted. He smiled, a slow expression that transformed his serious face. "Then I will take a 1/4 pound of those too." She added the candy to his order and finished wrapping everything in brown paper, tying the parcels with twine. When she handed them across the counter, their fingers brushed briefly, and she pulled back as though burned. "Thank you for your help, Miss Kincaid," Jacob said, gathering his purchases. "I expect I will see you again if I get that ranch work." "I hope you do," she replied, then caught herself. "Get the work, I mean." He settled his hat back on his head and touched the brim in farewell. "Good day to you, madam." The bell chimed as he left, and Theresa stood alone in the empty store, her heart beating faster than it should. She pressed her hands against the counter to steady herself, annoyed at her reaction. Men came into the store every day. There was nothing special about Jacob Brennan. He was just another drifter, just another cowboy passing through Columbus on his way to somewhere else. But she could not shake the memory of his blue eyes or the way he had looked at her like she was a person, not a cripple, Mrs. Patterson returned a few minutes later, full of gossip about the milliner's new inventory. Theresa listened with half an ear, nodding at appropriate intervals while her mind wandered to the cowboy with the gentle voice and respectful manner. That evening, as she walked home to her small room above the seamstress shop, Theresa allowed herself a moment of foolish hope. Then she crushed it firmly back down. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment, and she had experienced enough of that to last a lifetime. Her room was simple: a narrow bed, a washstand, a trunk for her clothes, and a small bookshelf that held her most precious possessions. She had 6 books, purchased one at a time over the years with carefully saved pennies. She also had her mother's Bible, the only thing left from the woman who had died bringing her into the world. Her father had passed when she was 12, leaving her in the care of an aunt who tolerated her rather than loved her. The aunt had died 2 years ago, and Theresa had been alone ever since. She did not mind the solitude as much as others might. Being alone was better than being pitied. Theresa changed out of her work dress and washed her face and hands in the basin. She ate a simple supper of bread and cheese, then sat by her window and watched the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that took her breath away. This was her favorite time of day, when the world seemed softer somehow, when anything felt possible. She thought of Jacob Brennan and wondered if he would find work at the Patterson Ranch. Probably not. There were always more men looking for work than there were jobs available. He would likely move on to the next town, and she would never see him again. It was better that way, she told herself firmly. Better not to let her imagination run wild with impossible scenarios. But that night, as she lay in her narrow bed and listened to the sounds of the town settling down for sleep, she allowed herself to remember the way he had smiled at her when she mentioned the lemon drops. It was a small, harmless memory, and she fell asleep holding it close. The next morning, Theresa arrived at the store to find Mrs. Patterson in an agitated state. The older woman was wringing her hands and pacing behind the counter, her usually neat hair escaping from its pins. "What is wrong?" Theresa asked, setting down her cane and removing her bonnet. "It is my sister in Santa Fe," Mrs. Patterson said. "She is taken ill quite seriously. I received a telegram first thing this morning. I must go to her immediately." Theresa's stomach tightened with anxiety. "Of course you must. Do not worry about the store. I can manage it, Mrs. Patterson looked at her with obvious doubt. "By yourself? For what could be weeks?" The words stung, but Theresa kept her face calm. "I have been working here for 3 years, Mrs. Patterson. I know the inventory, the suppliers, the customers. I can manage." The older woman hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "I suppose you will have to. I am catching the noon train. The keys are in the drawer and the account books are current. Do not give credit to anyone without checking the ledger first, especially not to Tom Crawford. He still owes from last month." They spent the next few hours going over details that Theresa already knew, but she listened patiently, understanding that Mrs. Patterson needed to feel that she was leaving things in capable hands. When the time came for her to leave for the train depot, she pressed the store keys into Theresa's hand with a look of worry. "Send a telegram if anything goes wrong," she instructed. "Everything will be fine," Theresa assured her. "Give your sister my well wishes." After Mrs. Patterson departed in a flurry of skirts and anxiety, Theresa stood alone in the store and felt a strange sense of satisfaction. For the first time in her life, she had real responsibility, real trust placed in her abilities rather than pity for her limitations. She would not disappoint that trust. The morning passed quietly with only a few customers. Theresa served them efficiently, making change and wrapping purchases with the skill of long practice. Around midday, when the heat outside made the air shimmer and most sensible people stayed indoors, the bell chimed and Jacob Brennan walked in. He looked cleaner than the day before, his face freshly shaved and his clothes brushed free of trail dust. He carried his hat in his hands and offered her a nod of greeting. "Miss Kincaid," he said. "Good to see you again." "Mr. Brennan." She felt her pulse quicken and silently scolded herself for it. "Did you find work at the Patterson Ranch?" "I did, thanks to your suggestion." He approached the counter with that same easy, unhurried stride. "Mr. Patterson hired me on yesterday evening. I start tomorrow, but he sent me into town today with a list of supplies he needs." He handed her a folded piece of paper, and she opened it to see a list written in a neat, precise hand. Fencing wire, nails, several bags of oats for the horses, leather strapping, and various other ranch necessities. "This will take me a little while to gather," she said, studying the list. "Some of these things are in the back storeroom." "I have time," Jacob said. "No hurry at all." Theresa began collecting the items, moving between the front of the store and the storeroom. It took longer than usual because some of the heavier items were on high shelves where she could not reach easily. She was struggling with a coil of fencing wire when Jacob appeared in the doorway. "Let me help with that," he offered. Pride made her want to refuse, but practicality won out. "Thank you. I need 2 coils of that wire, the one you are looking at." He reached up easily and brought down both coils, carrying them to the front counter without apparent effort. When he returned, he asked, "What else do you need?" "The bags of oats are too heavy for me to move," she admitted, hating the confession but seeing no way around it. "There are 4 50-pound bags in the corner." Jacob carried the bags out 2 at a time, stacking them neatly near the counter. He did it without comment, without making a show of his strength or her weakness. He simply helped, as naturally as breathing, and when they finished gathering everything on the list, he thanked her for her assistance as though she had done him a favor rather than the reverse. She tallied the cost, adding up the long column of numbers with practiced speed. "That comes to $18.75. Mr. Patterson has an account with us. Shall I put it on his tab?" "Yes, madam, if you would." She made a note in the ledger, recording the purchase and the date. When she looked up, she found Jacob watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "You run this store by yourself?" he asked. "Mrs. Patterson had to go to Santa Fe to care for her sister," Theresa explained. "I am managing things until she returns. That is a lot of responsibility." "I am capable of it," she said, a defensive edge creeping into her voice despite her best efforts. Jacob held up a hand in a peaceable gesture. "I did not mean to suggest otherwise. I think it is admirable that she trusts you with her business. This is not a small operation." The compliment, offered so simply and genuinely, caught her off guard. She was accustomed to pity, to condescension, to being underestimated. But Jacob spoke to her as an equal, and something inside her chest loosened just a little. "Thank you," she said quietly. He smiled at her again, that slow smile that made his blue eyes warm. "I will need to bring a wagon around to load all this. Would it be all right if I left it here and came back in about an hour? Of course, I will have everything ready." After he left, Theresa found herself humming as she worked, an old tune her father used to sing. She caught herself and stopped, but the lightness in her chest remained. Over the next 2 weeks, Jacob came into town 3 more times on various errands for the Patterson ranch. Each time, he spent a few extra minutes talking with Theresa, asking her opinion on supplies, commenting on the weather, sharing small observations about ranch life. He told her about the new foal that had been born, about fixing the fence line on the north pasture, about the mountain lion tracks they had found near the water tank. Theresa found herself looking forward to his visits more than she should. She began to take extra care with her appearance on the days when ranch hands typically came to town, pinning her hair more neatly, wearing her better dress. She told herself she was being foolish, that she was reading far too much into simple, friendly conversation, but she could not seem to help herself. Other people in town noticed too. Martha Hensley made a pointed comment about that new ranch hand, who seems to spend an awful lot of time at the general store, her tone heavy with insinuation. Old Mr. Crawford, when he came in to finally pay his overdue account, asked Theresa if she had caught herself a beau, then laughed at his own joke as though it were the funniest thing in the world. Each comment stung, but Theresa maintained her composure and her dignity. She refused to let them see how their words affected her. On a Saturday afternoon in late August, when the heat pressed down like a physical weight and the store was empty of customers, Jacob came in carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Afternoon, Miss Kincaid," he greeted her. "Mr. Brennan," she smiled despite herself. "What can I help you with today? Actually, I am not here for ranch supplies." He set the package on the counter. "I brought you something." Theresa stared at the package as though it might bite her. "What is it? Open it and see." With trembling fingers, she untied the string and folded back the paper. Inside was a beautiful leather bookmark, tooled with an intricate design of flowers and vines. It was clearly handmade, the craftsmanship exquisite. "I noticed you reading during your lunch break the other day," Jacob said, his voice a little uncertain. "Thought you might have use for this. I made it myself. Leatherwork is something of a hobby." Theresa ran her fingers over the smooth leather, tracing the delicate pattern. No one had given her a gift in years, certainly not something made with such obvious care and skill. "It is beautiful," she whispered, "but I cannot accept this." "Why not?" She looked up at him, struggling to find the right words. "People will talk. They already are talking. Let them talk." Jacob's voice was firm. "I made a gift for a friend. There is nothing improper in that. A friend." The word felt strange in her mouth. "I would like to think we are friends," he said, "unless you object to the notion." Theresa thought about what friendship meant. Conversation, shared interests, mutual respect. When had she last had a true friend? Not since childhood, before her difference had set her apart from the other girls. "I do not object," she said softly, "and thank you for the bookmark. I will treasure it." His face brightened with genuine pleasure. "I am glad. Say, I was wondering if you might like to take a walk this evening when the heat breaks. There is a nice path out by the arroyo, pretty this time of year." Her heart soared and plummeted in the same instant. A walk. He was asking her to walk with him, when walking was the thing she did worst in the world. When every step required concentration and effort, when her cane marked her as different from everyone else. "I am not much for walking," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jacob was quiet for a moment, and she could not bring herself to look at his face, afraid of what she would see there. Pity, probably. Regret at having made the offer. "How about sitting then?" he asked. "There are some nice flat rocks out by the arroyo. We could sit and watch the sunset. I could bring some of those lemon drops you like." She looked up at him then, and found no pity in his eyes, only warmth and what looked like genuine hope. He was not rescinding his invitation, merely adapting it to accommodate her limitations. Not making a fuss about it, just offering an alternative. "I would like that," she heard herself say. They made arrangements to meet at the end of the main street at 6 o'clock, when the worst of the heat would have passed and the long desert twilight would be beginning. After Jacob left, Theresa stood in the empty store and held the leather bookmark to her chest, her heart pounding. She was being reckless. She was setting herself up for heartbreak. But for once in her life, she decided to embrace the foolishness of hope. That evening, Theresa changed into her best dress, a simple brown cotton with a white collar that she had made herself. She brushed out her hair and repinned it, washed her face and hands, and allowed herself a tiny amount of the rosewater perfume that had been her aunt's. Then she picked up her cane and made her way down the stairs and through the streets of Columbus. Jacob was waiting at the appointed spot, leaning against a fence post with his hat tilted back and his arms crossed. When he saw her approaching, he straightened and smiled. "You look lovely," he said. "Thank you." She felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. They walked together toward the edge of town, moving slowly to accommodate her pace. Jacob did not rush or show any sign of impatience. He kept his stride matched to hers and talked easily about his day, about the cattle they had moved to a different pasture, about the sunset he had watched from the ridge above the ranch. The arroyo was a dry creek bed that only ran with water during the rare desert rains. Cottonwood trees grew along its banks, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. Jacob led her to a spot where flat rocks formed natural seats, sheltered by the trees and offering a view west toward the mountains. He spread his coat on one of the rocks before she could sit down, a gesture of consideration that touched her deeply. Then he settled on the rock beside hers and pulled out a small paper sack of lemon drops from his pocket. They shared the candy and watched as the sun sank toward the horizon, setting the sky ablaze with color. The air cooled gradually, becoming almost pleasant after the scorching heat of the day. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "This is beautiful," Theresa said softly. "It is," Jacob agreed. "I have been all over the territories, and every place has its own kind of beauty, but there is something about the desert that gets into your blood. The way the light changes, the colors at sunset, the smell of the air after a rain. You have traveled a lot since I was 18. My parents died of fever that year, both of them within a week of each other. We had a small farm in Kansas, but I could not work it alone. Sold it and headed west, looking for something I could not name." He paused, gazing at the sunset. "I think maybe I was looking for a place to belong." "Have you found it?" she asked. "I think maybe I am starting to." The way he looked at her when he said it made her breath catch. She wanted to believe what his eyes seemed to say, but fear held her back. Fear of hope, fear of disappointment, fear of the inevitable moment when he would realize that she was not worth the trouble. "Tell me about yourself," Jacob said. "I have done all the talking." So she told him, hesitantly at first and then with growing confidence. She told him about her parents, both dead before she turned 13. About her aunt who had taken her in but never quite warmed to her. About the books she loved to read, the sunsets she watched from her window, the quiet satisfaction she found in the orderly world of the general store. She did not talk about her leg, about the pain that sometimes kept her awake at night, about the loneliness that had become her constant companion. But somehow, she thought he understood anyway. The sky deepened from orange to purple to deep blue, and the first stars began to appear. Jacob walked her back to town, escorting her all the way to the door of the seamstress shop. "Thank you for this evening," he said. "I cannot remember the last time I enjoyed myself so much." "Neither can I," she admitted. "Would you allow me to call on you again? Maybe we could have supper together at the hotel restaurant." The hotel restaurant was where courting couples went. It was a public declaration of interest. If she said yes, the whole town would know by morning. "Yes," she said, throwing caution to the wind. "I would like that." His smile was bright enough to rival the stars beginning to populate the sky. "How about Tuesday evening? I can get away from the ranch then." Tuesday would be perfect. He touched the brim of his hat in farewell, and she watched him walk away, his tall figure gradually fading into the darkness. Then she climbed the stairs to her room and sat on her bed, the leather bookmark in her hands, and allowed herself to hope. Tuesday evening could not come fast enough. The intervening days dragged by with agonizing slowness. Theresa served customers, took inventory, balanced the accounts, and counted the hours until she would see Jacob again. The town gossip mill, predictably, went into overdrive. Women whispered behind their hands when she passed on the street. Men looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. And Martha Hensley made a point of coming into the store on Monday morning to deliver what she probably thought was friendly advice. "Theresa, dear, I feel I should warn you," Martha said, her voice oozing false concern. "Men like Jacob Brennan do not settle down with women like you. Cowboys are drifters by nature. He will break your heart and move on to the next town." Theresa forced herself to remain calm and professional. "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Hensley. Will there be anything else?" "I am only trying to protect you from disappointment. You must know that marriage is not in the cards for someone with your condition. It is not kind of him to give you false hope." The words struck deep, hitting every insecurity Theresa had spent years trying to bury. But she refused to let Martha see the damage. "Mrs. Hensley, that will be 50 cents for the thread," she said evenly. Martha paid and left in a huff, but her words lingered like poison. What if she was right? What if Jacob was simply being kind, amusing himself with the crippled shop girl until something better came along? But then Tuesday evening arrived, and when Jacob called for her at precisely 6 o'clock, dressed in his cleanest shirt and holding a small bouquet of wildflowers he had clearly picked himself. All her doubts melted away. "These are for you," he said, offering the flowers with an uncertain smile. "I know they are not fancy, but I thought you might like them." The bouquet was a riot of color: yellow desert marigolds, purple prairie asters, and delicate white evening primrose. Theresa buried her face in the blooms, breathing in their faint, sweet scent. "They are perfect," she said. "Far better than fancy hothouse roses." They walked together to the hotel, and if people stared, Theresa found she did not care. Jacob offered her his arm, shortening his stride to match hers, and talked easily about his day to fill any awkward silences. The hotel restaurant was the finest dining establishment in Columbus, which was not saying much, but it was clean and the food was decent. The proprietor, Mr. Chen, was a Chinese immigrant who had come to work on the railroad and stayed to open his restaurant. He greeted them with a warm smile and led them to a table by the window. Theresa had never eaten in a restaurant before. She had passed by the windows countless times and watched other people enjoying meals together, but it had never occurred to her that she might one day be among them. Jacob ordered for both of them: roast chicken with potatoes and vegetables, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. While they waited for the food, they talked, continuing the easy conversation they had begun by the arroyo. He told her about learning to break horses as a boy, about the time he had seen a tornado in Kansas, about the year he had spent working on a cattle drive and sleeping under the stars. She told him about the books she had read, about the time she had tried to teach herself to sew a dress from a pattern and ended up with something that fit like a sack, about her dream of someday visiting a big city like Denver or San Francisco. "Why have you not gone?" Jacob asked. Theresa hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Travel is difficult for me. The trains have stairs, the coaches are cramped and uncomfortable. And where would I go? What would I do? A woman alone, with no family and no money and a crippled leg besides." She said the word deliberately, claiming it before he could. Crippled. It was what she was, no point in pretending otherwise. Jacob was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You are not crippled. You have a leg that does not work the way it should, but that is just one part of you. You are also smart and kind and braver than you give yourself credit for. Running that store by yourself, managing all those responsibilities, that takes real courage." "I do not feel brave," she admitted. "Brave people never do. They just do what needs doing despite being afraid." The food arrived, and it was delicious. Theresa savored every bite, not just the taste but the entire experience. The warm glow of the lamps, the murmur of conversation from other diners, the sight of Jacob across the table smiling at her like she was someone precious. Over dessert, he told her more about the Patterson Ranch, about his hopes of saving enough money to buy a small piece of land of his own someday. "Nothing fancy," he said. "Just enough for a small herd, a good house, maybe some chickens and a vegetable garden, a place to put down roots." "That sounds wonderful," Theresa said wistfully. "What would your dream place be like?" he asked. She thought about it, allowing herself to imagine for the first time in years. "A house with big windows to let in the light, bookshelves on every wall, a porch where I could sit and watch the sunset. And a garden, definitely a garden with flowers and herbs and vegetables. I have always wanted to grow things." "That sounds perfect," Jacob said softly. "I hope you get it someday." The evening ended far too soon. Jacob paid for the meal despite Theresa's protests that she could pay her share, and then he walked her home through the quiet streets. At her door, he took her hand gently. "I had a wonderful time tonight," he said. "So did I. May I see you again? I know I work long hours, but I could come into town on Sunday after church. We could have a picnic lunch, maybe out by the arroyo again. I would like that very much." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture so courtly and old-fashioned that it made her heart flutter. Then he bid her good night and walked away, and Theresa climbed the stairs to her room feeling like she was floating. Over the next month, Jacob called on her regularly. They had picnics by the arroyo, quiet dinners at the hotel, long conversations on the bench outside the general store after she closed for the day. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their dreams and fears, their pasts and their hopes for the future. Theresa learned that Jacob loved poetry but was embarrassed to admit it, that he was terrified of snakes, that his favorite meal was his mother's pot roast, and he missed her every single day. Jacob learned that Theresa had taught herself to read music from a book, but had never had access to an actual piano, that she was afraid of thunderstorms, that she sometimes dreamed of dancing even though she never would. The town watched their courtship with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. Some people, like Mr. Chen at the hotel and old Doc Harrison, seemed genuinely pleased to see Theresa happy. But others, like Martha Hensley and her circle of friends, made no secret of their belief that the whole thing was doomed to failure. Theresa tried not to let the gossip bother her, but it was hard. The whispers followed her everywhere, and more than once she overheard conversations speculating about what Jacob could possibly see in her, what his real motives might be, how long it would be before he came to his senses. She tried to hide her hurt from Jacob, but he was more perceptive than she gave him credit for. One Sunday afternoon, as they sat by the arroyo sharing a lunch of cold chicken and biscuits, he brought it up directly. "The talk is bothering you," he said. It was not a question. Theresa focused on wrapping up the remains of their lunch, not meeting his eyes. "People will talk regardless. It does not matter. It matters to me if it is hurting you." "I am used to it," she said quietly. "I have been the subject of gossip my whole life. Poor Theresa, so tragic, such a shame." "I learned a long time ago to ignore it." Jacob was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "They tell you that you will never find love, that no man would want you, don't they?" She looked up at him, startled by his directness. "That is what I have heard them say," he continued. "At the mercantile, at the saloon, even at church. They talk about you like you are less than a whole person, like you are not worthy of love or happiness." Tears stung her eyes and she blinked them back fiercely. "They are not entirely wrong. I am not what any man would choose given better options." "Stop." Jacob's voice was sharp, sharper than she had ever heard it. "Stop letting them put those thoughts in your head. You are everything any man could want. Intelligent, kind, strong, beautiful. Your leg does not change any of that." "It is easy for you to say," she whispered. "But you will leave eventually. Cowboys always do. And I will be left here alone, having made a fool of myself by believing that someone like you could truly care for someone like me." Jacob stood up abruptly and began pacing along the edge of the arroyo. Theresa watched him, her heart sinking. She had ruined everything with her insecurities and doubts, but then he stopped and turned to face her, and the look in his eyes was fierce. "I am not going anywhere," he said. "And I am not just some cowboy passing through. I came to Columbus looking for a place to belong, and I found it. I found it in you. Jacob, let me finish." He came back and knelt in front of her, taking both her hands in his. "I have been in love with you since the first day I walked into that store, and you looked at me like I was a person worth knowing. Every day since then, I have fallen a little bit more in love with you. The way you laugh, the way you lose yourself in a book, the way you stand up to people who underestimate you. I love all of it, and I love you." Theresa could not stop the tears now. They spilled down her cheeks as she looked at this incredible man kneeling before her, declaring his love in the golden afternoon sunlight. "I am scared," she admitted. "I am so scared that this is not real, that I will wake up and find it was all a dream." "It is real," Jacob said firmly. "I am real, and my feelings are real, and I am not going anywhere. I want to build a life with you, Theresa. A real life with a house and a garden and all the books you could ever want. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to prove every single person in this town wrong about you." "You already have," she whispered. He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "Then let me keep proving it every day for the rest of our lives. Marry me, Theresa, be my wife." The world seemed to stop spinning. The breeze died down, the birds stopped singing, and there was only Jacob's face, earnest and hopeful, waiting for her answer. Every sensible part of her brain screamed that this was too fast, too good to be true, that she should be cautious and practical. But her heart, that foolish, hopeful heart, knew exactly what it wanted. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Jacob's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Theresa wrapped her arms around him and held on tight, afraid that if she let go, this perfect moment would disappear like morning mist. They sat there for a long time, holding each other, making whispered plans and promises. Jacob told her about the land he had already started saving for. A small plot about 3 miles from town that the owner was willing to sell cheap. Theresa told him about the hope chest she had started as a girl and then abandoned, thinking she would never need it, tucked away in the back of her wardrobe. The sun was sinking low when they finally made their way back to town, walking close together, Jacob's arm around her waist to steady her. Theresa did not care who saw them or what they said. She was engaged to be married to a man who loved her, truly loved her, and the whole town could talk until the cows came home. They decided to wait until Mrs. Patterson returned before making a formal announcement, which happened 2 weeks later. The store owner returned full of relief that her sister was on the mend and fulsome in her praise of how well Theresa had managed in her absence. "You have more than earned a bonus," Mrs. Patterson declared. "And perhaps we should discuss making you a partner in the business. You have proven yourself more than capable." The offer stunned Theresa, but before she could respond, Jacob, who had come into town to meet Mrs. Patterson's return, spoke up. "That is generous of you, madam, but I should tell you that Theresa and I are engaged to be married. We will be setting up our own household soon." Mrs. Patterson's eyes went wide, and then her face broke into a genuine smile. "Well, that is wonderful news. Congratulations to you both. When is the wedding?" "We were thinking early October," Theresa said, finding her voice. "Before the weather turns cold." "Perfect. And Theresa, my offer still stands. Married women can work too, especially when they are as good at it as you are. We can work out an arrangement that suits your new circumstances." It was more than Theresa had dared hope for. A husband who loved her, work she enjoyed, and the respect of her employer. She felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The announcement of their engagement spread through Columbus like wildfire. The reactions were mixed, predictably. Some people were genuinely happy for them. Mr. Cheng gave them a bottle of wine and told Jacob he was a lucky man. Doc Harrison shook Jacob's hand and told him he had good taste. The minister, Father Williams, was delighted and immediately began talking about wedding preparations, but others were less kind. Martha Hensley made pointed comments about men who were foolish enough to saddle themselves with damaged goods. Tom Crawford, drunk at the saloon, made a crude joke about what Jacob must see in Theresa that made the other cowboys laugh. And more than one person suggested to Jacob's face that he was making a terrible mistake. Jacob bore it all with remarkable patience, but Theresa could see the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. It came to a head one Saturday afternoon when Theresa was working in the store and heard raised voices outside. She made her way to the door and found Jacob standing face to face with 3 ranch hands from a neighboring spread, men she recognized by sight but did not know personally. "I am just saying," one of them was saying, "you are throwing your life away on a cripple when you could have any normal woman you wanted." "You need to stop talking right now," Jacob said, his voice low and dangerous. "Why, it is the truth. Everyone is saying it. She will not be able to keep a house proper, won't be able to bear children without complications, won't be a real wife to you. You are wasting yourself out of pity." Jacob's fist connected with the man's jaw before Theresa could even process what was happening. The cowboy went down hard, and his 2 friends immediately jumped into the fray. It was a short but brutal fight, 3 against 1, and while Jacob held his own admirably, he was outnumbered. "Stop it," Theresa shouted, but they ignored her. She turned and called for help, and within minutes, several townsmen had pulled the combatants apart. Jacob had a split lip and a bruising eye, and his knuckles were bloody. The other men were in various states of dishevelment, but the one who had spoken had definitely gotten the worst of it. Sheriff Morgan, a grizzled man in his 50s, surveyed the scene with weary frustration. "What is this about?" "They were insulting Miss Kincaid," Jacob said, his voice rough. "He hit me for no reason," the cowboy protested, holding his jaw. "That is a lie," Jacob shot back. "I warned you to stop talking." Several witnesses corroborated Jacob's version of events, and Sheriff Morgan let Jacob go with a warning to control his temper. As the crowd dispersed, Theresa approached Jacob with a handkerchief to dab at his bleeding lip. "You should not have done that," she said softly. "Yes, I should have. Nobody gets to talk about you that way. Violence does not solve anything. Maybe not, but it made me feel better." He winced as she pressed the handkerchief to his split lip. "And maybe now people will think twice before saying such things where I can hear them." Theresa sighed but did not argue further. She cleaned his wounds and sent him back to the ranch with strict instructions to put a cold compress on his eye. After he left, she stood in the store and felt a confusing mixture of emotions. Worry for Jacob, anger at the men who had provoked him, and a strange warmth in her chest at having someone willing to fight for her honor. The incident became the talk of the town, adding fuel to the already blazing fire of gossip. But it also seemed to have the effect Jacob had hoped for. People stopped making comments within his hearing, at least. Whether they stopped talking altogether was doubtful, but Theresa found she cared less and less what they thought. She had Jacob, and he loved her. That was all that mattered. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Theresa made her wedding dress with help from Agatha Wright, the seamstress whose shop was below her room. Agatha was a quiet woman in her 40s who had never married, and she threw herself into the project with unexpected enthusiasm. "Ivory silk," she declared, "with lace at the collar and cuffs. Simple but elegant. You will be beautiful." They spent evenings working on the dress together, and Theresa found herself confiding in Agatha in a way she had not confided in anyone except Jacob. The older woman listened without judgment and offered advice when asked. "Are you nervous?" Agatha asked one evening as she carefully stitched the lace. "Terrified," Theresa admitted. "Not about marrying Jacob. I am certain of him, but about everything else. Being a wife, managing a household, all the things I never thought I would need to know." "You will learn," Agatha said calmly. "We all do. Marriage is not something you know how to do beforehand. You figure it out as you go together." Meanwhile, Jacob was working extra hours at the ranch to save money and spending his free time building a house on the land he had purchased. It was small, just 3 rooms, but he was building it with his own hands and the help of a few men from the ranch who had become his friends. He took Theresa out to see it one Sunday afternoon when the frame was up and the roof was being shingled. She stood in what would be their front room and looked around with wonder. "The windows will go there," Jacob explained, pointing to openings in the wall. "Big ones like you wanted to let in plenty of light. The bedroom will be back there, and this smaller room can be whatever you want. A sewing room, a library, whatever makes you happy." "A library," Theresa said immediately. "Definitely a library." He smiled and pulled her close. "Then a library it is. I will build shelves on every wall." She rested her head against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. "I cannot believe this is real sometimes. That you are real, that this is happening." "Believe it," he said softly. "In less than 2 weeks, you are going to be my wife, and we are going to build a life together in this house. It is as real as anything has ever been." The wedding took place on the first Sunday in October, in the small church at the end of Main Street. It was not a large affair. Theresa had no family to invite, and Jacob's only living relative was a cousin in Missouri who could not make the trip on short notice. But the church was surprisingly full nonetheless. Mrs. Patterson came, of course, and Agatha Wright. Mr. Cheng closed his restaurant for the afternoon to attend. Doc Harrison was there, and Sheriff Morgan, and Father Williams performed the ceremony with genuine warmth. Even some of the ranch hands from the Patterson spread came, men who had worked alongside Jacob and come to respect him. Theresa wore her ivory silk dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Jacob had picked that morning. Her hands shook as she walked down the aisle, leaning on her cane, but when she saw Jacob standing at the altar in his best suit, his face full of love and pride, her nervousness faded. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. They exchanged vows in clear voices, promising to love and cherish each other in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death parted them. Jacob slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, and she did the same for him. And when Father Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed her with such tenderness that Theresa felt tears spring to her eyes. The small gathering applauded, and they walked back down the aisle together, man and wife. Outside the church, people threw rice and offered congratulations. Mr. Chen had prepared a wedding feast at his restaurant, and everyone was invited to celebrate. It was the happiest day of Theresa's life. She sat beside her husband at the head table, wearing her wedding dress and her gold ring, and felt like she had stepped into a fairy tale. People toasted their happiness. The food was delicious, and when Jacob took her hand and squeezed it gently, she knew that this was just the beginning. They spent their wedding night in the hotel, in the finest room that Columbus had to offer. Jacob was gentle and patient, making sure she was comfortable, that everything was at her pace. He told her she was beautiful, that he loved her, that he would spend the rest of his life making her happy. And Theresa, who had spent so many years believing she was unworthy of love, finally allowed herself to believe that she deserved this happiness, that she was enough exactly as she was. The next morning, they moved into their new house. It was sparsely furnished, with only the bare essentials that they had managed to scrape together. A bed, a table with 2 chairs, a cookstove, and a few other necessities. But it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Theresa took over the household duties, learning to cook on the temperamental stove, to keep the floors swept and the windows clean. It was harder than she had anticipated. Tasks that other women did easily took her twice as long because of her leg. Carrying water from the well, hanging laundry, kneading bread dough, All of it required adaptations and accommodations, but she refused to be discouraged. When she struggled, she found new ways to do things. She sat down to knead bread instead of standing. She made multiple trips with smaller buckets of water instead of trying to carry heavy ones. She hung the clothesline lower so she could reach it easily. Jacob never complained, never criticized. He helped where he could, carrying the heavy things, reaching the high places. But he also respected her independence, letting her do what she could on her own. Theresa continued to work at the general store 3 days a week, an arrangement she and Mrs. Patterson had worked out that allowed her to contribute to the household income while still having time to manage her home. Jacob continued at the Patterson ranch, saving money toward expanding their land and eventually starting his own small cattle operation. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Evenings were spent together in their cozy front room, Jacob reading aloud from the newspaper or one of Theresa's books while she sewed or knitted. Sundays they reserved for each other, often picnicking by the arroyo or simply sitting on their front porch watching the sunset. The town slowly adjusted to the reality of their marriage. Some people, like Martha Hensley, continued to disapprove and predict disaster. But most folks eventually accepted them as just another married couple. The gossip died down, replaced by new scandals and dramas to occupy people's attention. 4 months into their marriage, Theresa realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She remembered the cowboy's words before Jacob had hit him, about complications and difficulties. She knew that childbirth was dangerous for any woman, but especially for someone with her physical limitations. Doc Harrison confirmed the pregnancy and her fears. "I will not lie to you, Theresa," he said gently. "This will not be easy. Your frame is small. Your leg means you cannot move around as easily, and there could be complications. But women with far worse challenges than yours have borne healthy children. We will take every precaution, and I will be with you every step of the way." She told Jacob that evening, her heart in her throat, afraid of how he would react. He listened to her stumbling explanation and Doc Harrison's warnings, and then he pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "A child, our child." "You are not frightened?" she asked. "Of course I am frightened. But I am also happy and excited and so full of love I think I might burst. We will get through this together, just like we get through everything else." The pregnancy was difficult. Theresa was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep anything down. Her already challenging mobility became even more difficult as her belly grew. Simple tasks became monumental efforts. But Jacob was there every step of the way, patient and supportive, doing whatever needed to be done. Mrs. Patterson insisted she stop working at the store by her 5th month, and Theresa reluctantly agreed. She spent her days at home, resting when Doc Harrison ordered her to, keeping busy with small tasks when she could. Agatha Wright visited regularly, bringing food and gossip and companionship. Other women in town, some of whom had never been particularly friendly, stopped by with advice and baby clothes they had saved from their own children. It seemed that impending motherhood had softened some hearts and opened some doors. Theresa was touched by the kindness, even from unexpected sources. The baby came in early June, on a hot night when the air was thick and still. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Doc Harrison stayed the entire time, and Agatha was there too, holding Theresa's hand and wiping her forehead with cool cloths. Jacob waited in the front room, pacing back and forth, while Theresa labored in their bedroom. More than once, Doc Harrison looked worried, and Theresa knew that things were not going as smoothly as they should. But she gritted her teeth and pushed through the pain, determined to bring this child safely into the world. Finally, as dawn was breaking and painting the sky pink and gold, a baby's cry pierced the air. Theresa collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure, and heard Doc Harrison say, "It is a boy. You have a son." They placed the baby in her arms, a tiny, red-faced creature with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. Theresa looked down at him and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "Jacob," she called weakly, "come meet your son." Her husband appeared in the doorway, his face pale and drawn from worry. But when he saw her holding the baby, his expression transformed into pure joy. He crossed the room in 3 strides and sat on the edge of the bed, looking down at their child with wonder. "He is perfect," Jacob whispered. "And you are incredible. I have never seen anyone as strong as you." They named him Samuel Jacob Brennan, after Jacob's father. Little Sam, as they quickly began calling him, was healthy and strong, with a pair of lungs that could wake the dead when he was hungry. The weeks after his birth were exhausting. Theresa was recovering from the difficult labor, learning to care for an infant, and dealing with the limitations of her leg all at the same time. There were moments when she felt completely overwhelmed, when she wondered if she was capable of being a good mother. But Jacob was there, sharing the nighttime feedings, changing diapers, walking the floor with Sam when he was fussy. They learned together, making mistakes and figuring things out as they went. And gradually, it became easier. Sam grew quickly, a happy baby who smiled early and often. He had his father's eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. When he was 6 months old, he started pulling himself up on the furniture, eager to explore his world. Life settled into a new rhythm. Theresa managed the household and cared for Sam, while Jacob worked at the ranch and continued to build their future. They saved money carefully, adding to their small herd of cattle, improving their house, building the life they had dreamed of. When Sam was 2 years old, Theresa realized she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because her body knew what to expect, perhaps because she was less afraid. Their second child, a daughter they named Caroline Grace, was born on a cool autumn evening with far less difficulty than her brother's arrival. Caroline was delicate where Sam was sturdy, quiet where he was boisterous. She had Theresa's brown hair and a smile that could melt hearts. Sam adored his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from feeding her to changing her clothes. Their family was growing, and so was their prosperity. Jacob had proven himself such a valuable worker that Mr. Patterson made him foreman of the ranch, a position that came with better pay and more responsibility. They used the extra money to buy more land, to add onto their house, to start building the cattle operation that Jacob had dreamed of. By the time Sam was 5 and Caroline was 3, they had a modest but successful ranch of their own. Jacob still worked for Patterson, but he was also building something for his family, a legacy to pass down to his children. Theresa had never been happier. Her days were full and busy, managing the household, raising the children, helping Jacob with the ranch accounts and paperwork. Her legs still pained her sometimes, especially when the weather changed or she had been on her feet too long. But she had learned to pace herself, to accept help when it was offered, to be proud of what she could do rather than ashamed of what she could not. The town's attitude toward her had changed dramatically over the years. She was no longer poor Theresa Kincaid, the crippled shop girl nobody wanted. She was Mrs. Brennan, Jacob's wife, Sam and Caroline's mother, a respected member of the community. When she walked through town with her children, people greeted her warmly. When she attended church on Sundays, She sat with her family in their regular pew, and no one whispered behind their hands about her anymore. Even Martha Hensley had changed her tune, or at least stopped making openly hostile comments. One day, she actually stopped Theresa on the street to admire Caroline and tell her what a lovely family she had. "I must admit," Martha said, in what was probably the closest thing to an apology Theresa would ever get, "I was wrong about you and Jacob. You have built a good life together." "Thank you," Theresa said simply, and meant it. The years passed in a blur of activity and growth. Sam started school and proved to be an excellent student, particularly good with numbers. Caroline was more interested in drawing and music, spending hours with the slate and chalk that Theresa bought her, creating pictures of their ranch and family. Jacob's cattle operation grew steadily. He was good at it, with an eye for quality stock and a knack for knowing when to buy and when to sell. By the time Sam was 10, they had one of the more successful small ranches in the area. Theresa sometimes thought back to that day when Jacob had first walked into the general store, a dusty cowboy looking for supplies and work. She thought about how impossible it had seemed that someone like him could ever love someone like her. And she marveled at how wrong she had been, how wrong the whole town had been. Jacob had not just proven them wrong. He had shown them that love was not about perfection or meeting someone else's expectations. It was about finding the person who saw you for who you truly were and loved you not in spite of your flaws but as a complete person, imperfections included. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jacob surprised her with a piano. It was not a fancy one, just an old upright that he had found in Santa Fe and had shipped in on the train. But to Theresa, it was the most precious gift in the world. "You said you always wanted to play," Jacob explained, watching her face as she ran her fingers over the keys. "I know you have the music book, but you have never had an actual piano. I thought it was time to fix that." Theresa taught herself to play using the book she had owned for years, practicing in the evenings when the children were in bed. She was never very good at it, but that did not matter. What mattered was that her husband had remembered an offhand comment she had made years ago and had moved heaven and earth to make it possible. That was who Jacob was. A man who paid attention, who cared about the dreams and desires of the people he loved. A man who worked hard to build a life for his family. A man who had taken the lonely, hurting woman she had been and shown her that she was worthy of love. When Sam turned 12, he started helping his father on the ranch, learning the business from the ground up. Jacob was a patient teacher, explaining the why behind every decision, encouraging his son to think for himself and ask questions. Caroline, at 10, had no interest in cattle but was fascinated by the account books Theresa kept. She had inherited her mother's head for numbers and her father's business sense, and she spent hours poring over the ledgers, asking questions about profit and loss, supply and demand. "We have smart children," Jacob observed one evening, watching Caroline work on a particularly complicated calculation while Sam read a book about animal husbandry. "We do," Theresa agreed. "They are going to do great things." "They learned from the best," Jacob said, pulling her close and kissing the top of her head. "Their mother is the smartest, strongest woman I know." Theresa leaned into his embrace, still marveling after all these years that this was her life. That she had a husband who loved her, children who were healthy and happy, a home that was filled with warmth and laughter. She thought about the girl she had been at 22, standing behind the counter of the general store, believing that love was something that happened to other people. She thought about the whispers and the pity, the certainty that she would spend her life alone. And she thought about the moment Jacob Brennan had walked through that door and changed everything. 3 years later, when Sam was 15 and Caroline was 13, Theresa discovered she was pregnant again. It was unexpected, and at 38, she knew the risks were greater than they had been with her previous pregnancies. But she also knew her own strength and had faith in Doc Harrison, who had seen her through before. This pregnancy was her easiest yet. And in the spring of 1892, she gave birth to twin boys, Thomas Henry and William James. They were smaller than Sam had been, being twins, but healthy and strong. Sam and Caroline were fascinated by their baby brothers, helping to care for them and arguing over who got to hold them. Jacob was beside himself with joy, 4 children now filling their house with noise and life. The house itself had grown over the years, expanded to accommodate their growing family. It had the big windows Theresa had dreamed of, bookshelves in what they called the library, and a wide front porch where the family gathered in the evenings to watch the sunset. The ranch had grown too. They now employed several hands, and Jacob had earned a reputation as a fair boss and a shrewd businessman. He had achieved the dream he had spoken of years ago, a place to put down roots, to build something lasting. But more than the physical success, more than the land and the cattle and the comfortable house, what mattered to Jacob was the family he had built with Theresa. He told her so often, holding her close in the quiet moments after the children were asleep. "I rode into Columbus with nothing but my horse and my saddle," he would say, "and I found everything I ever needed. I found you." By the time Thomas and William were 5 years old, Sam was 20 and running much of the ranch operation himself, having a natural talent for the work that made Jacob proud. Caroline was 18 and keeping all the accounts, her head for numbers having developed into genuine financial acumen. She had recently started advising other ranchers in the area on their business practices, earning a reputation for wisdom beyond her years. The twins were a handful, full of energy and mischief, keeping Theresa busy. At 43, she had less energy than she once had, and her leg pained her more frequently. But she had learned to adapt, just as she always had, and she had help from her older children, who pitched in without being asked. One evening, as the family sat together on the front porch watching another spectacular desert sunset, Jacob squeezed Theresa's hand and said, "Have I told you lately that you are the most amazing woman in the world?" "Not since this morning," she replied, smiling at him. "Well, you are. Look at what we have built together. This ranch, these incredible children, this life. None of it would exist without you." Sam, overhearing, added, "Pa is right, Ma. You are pretty amazing. I do not know how you do everything you do." "With help from all of you," Theresa said, looking around at her family with love. "We built this together." As the years continued to pass, the ranch prospered even more. Sam married a local girl named Rebecca, a teacher at the Columbus school, and they built a house on the far side of the property. Caroline showed no interest in marriage, being far too busy with the business ventures she had started, including a partnership in a cattle brokerage firm in El Paso. Thomas and William grew into strong young men who worked the ranch alongside their father and brother. They were inseparable, the twins, finishing each other's sentences and working together with an efficiency that amazed everyone. Theresa's health remained good despite her concerns about her leg. She had learned to manage the pain with rest and the liniments Doc Harrison prescribed. She still walked with her cane, still moved more slowly than other women her age, but she moved with confidence and purpose. The town of Columbus had grown over the years, becoming more prosperous as the railroad brought more commerce and more people. But the core of the community remained the same, and the Brennan family was at its heart. Jacob eventually retired from active ranch work, turning the operation over to Sam and the twins, though he still offered advice when asked. He spent his days maintaining the property, working in the garden that Theresa had finally gotten around to planting, and doting on his grandchildren. Sam and Rebecca had 3 children in quick succession, filling the ranch with the sound of young voices again. Caroline, despite everyone's predictions that she would remain unmarried, surprised them all by falling in love with a railroad executive from Denver. They married when she was 30, and though they lived in the city, they visited often on Jacob and Theresa's 30th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party that seemed to include half of Columbus. The celebration was held on the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and enough food to feed an army. People came from all over, not just family and friends but business associates, neighboring ranchers, folks from town. One by one, they came up to congratulate the couple, to share memories, to express their admiration for what the Brennans had built together. Martha Hensley, now elderly and softened by time, approached Theresa with tears in her eyes. "I want to apologize," she said, "for everything I said all those years ago. I was wrong about you, wrong about what you could achieve, wrong about everything. You have proven to be one of the strongest, most capable women I have ever known." Theresa, who had long since forgiven the hurts of the past, embraced the older woman gently. "We were all younger then," she said, "and we all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them." As the sun set on that anniversary celebration, Jacob stood and called for everyone's attention. The crowd quieted, and he looked at Theresa with the same love in his eyes that had been there 30 years ago. "When I rode into Columbus in 1878, I was a cowboy with nothing to my name but a horse and a dream," he began. "People told Theresa she would never find love, that no man would want her. But the truth is, I am the lucky one. She is the one who took a chance on a drifter with big dreams and no prospects. She is the one who built this ranch with me, who raised our children to be good, strong people, who made a house into a home." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "They said she would never find love, but I am here to tell you all that I am the one who found love when I found her. Theresa Brennan is the love of my life, my partner, my best friend, and the strongest person I have ever known. And I thank God every single day that she said yes when I asked her to marry me." The crowd erupted in applause, and Theresa stood and moved into her husband's arms, tears streaming down her face. They danced together to the music the fiddler played, moving slowly around the makeshift dance floor, and Theresa thought about how she had once believed she would never dance. But here she was, in the arms of the man she loved, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, celebrating 30 years of marriage. She had danced through life with Jacob, not in the traditional sense perhaps, but in all the ways that truly mattered. Jacob and Theresa lived to see their grandchildren grow and marry, to welcome great-grandchildren into the family. The ranch passed down through the generations, each one adding to what Jacob and Theresa had started. The Brennan name became synonymous with integrity, hard work, and family values in Columbus and the surrounding territory. When Theresa was 70 years old, Jacob 73, they sat together on their front porch as they had done countless times before. The sunset painted the sky in familiar shades of orange and purple, and the desert air was sweet with the scent of sage and wildflowers. "You remember the day we met?" Jacob asked, holding her hand. "Every detail," Theresa replied. "You walked into the store looking for supplies and work. You had kind eyes. You had the most beautiful smile I had ever seen. Still do." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sun sank below the horizon. In the distance, They could hear their great-grandchildren playing, the sound of laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "We built a good life," Theresa said softly. "The best life," Jacob agreed. "And it all started because I walked into a general store and met a remarkable woman who the whole town had given up on. And you proved them all wrong." "No," Jacob said, squeezing her hand gently. "We proved them wrong. Together." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jacob and Theresa sat together on their porch, surrounded by the life they had built, the family they had raised, and the love that had sustained them through decades of joys and sorrows. The whole town had said she would never find love, but Jacob Brennan had proven them wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Their love story became legend in Columbus, passed down through generations as an example of what was possible when two people truly committed to each other. Young couples facing obstacles would be told about Jacob and Theresa, about how they overcame prejudice and doubt to build something lasting and beautiful. The ranch remained in the family for generations, each successive Brennan adding their own chapter to the story. But it all traced back to that day in 1878, when a dusty cowboy walked into a general store and looked at a young woman with a cane and saw not her limitations but her potential, not her differences but her beauty, not what the world said she could never have but what they could build together. Jacob and Theresa Brennan lived long, full lives, surrounded by love and family until the very end. They died within days of each other at the ages of 79 and 76, still holding hands, still in love, still proving that the whole town had been wrong about Theresa Kincaid all those years ago. Their headstone in the Columbus Cemetery bore a simple inscription that told their entire story. Jacob and Theresa Brennan. Together they built a legacy of love. They proved that anything is possible when two hearts are truly committed. And in the house that Jacob built with his own hands, expanded over the years to accommodate a growing family, their great-great-grandchildren still lived and worked the land, carrying on the tradition of strength, love, and perseverance that Jacob and Theresa had established so long ago. The story of how a cowboy proved an entire town wrong about a woman they said would never find love lived on, inspiring new generations to believe in the power of love to overcome any obstacle, to defy any expectation, to build something lasting and true.